The House will come to order. The Pledge of Allegiance this morning will be led by Jody Wapayo from the Community College of Denver.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Cole, please take the roll.
Representatives Becker, Buck, Buckner, Conti, Corum, Court, Del Grosso, Dorr, Duran, Everett, Exum, Fields, Fisher, Foote, Garcia, Gardner, Giroux, Janal, Hamner, Holbert, Hollinghorst. Here, somewhere. Representative Hollinghorst? Absent. Humphrey. Joshi. Kagan. Representative Kagan. Kraft Tharp. Labuda. Representative Labuda. Labuda? Oh, no, she's excused until noon.
Yeah,
Excused.
Can you hustle up? I need to get some coffee.
Landgraf. Yeah, tell you. Lawrence. Lebsock. Lee. He's here. May. McCann. McLaughlin. McNulty. Melton. Mitch Bush. Moreno. Murray. Navarro. Nordberg. Pabon. Peniston. Pedersen. Primavera. Priola. Rankin. Rosenthal. Madam Majority Leader is present. Ryden. Yeah. Sane. Just started walking. Just started walking. Salazar. Schaefer. Scott. Scott excused. Singer. Sonnenberg. Stevens. Swam. Zabo. Tyler. Vigil. Waller. Williams. Wilson. Wright. Young. Speaker Farinina. One excused. No. Yeah. Yeah.
With 64 members present, one excused, a quorum is present. Representative Wright.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, members. Mr. Speaker, I move that the reading of the Journal of Monday, April 7th, which, Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly was filled with good bills, simple bills, local control bills, more tools in the toolbox, unintended consequences, red herrings, and yes, even the potential for animal flotation devices, which is necessary for the preservation, immediate preservation of the public health, safety, and peace, be dispensed with, and that it be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. Members, can you please return to your desks? We are going to proceed right into memorials. We will not be doing announcements, introductions this morning. Mr. Kohler, can you please read the title to House Memorial 1003?
House Memorial 1003 by Representative Rosenthal, memorializing former Representative Don Friedman.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Memorial 1003 and ask that it be read at length.
Whereas our respected former colleague, Don Friedman, a past member of the Colorado House of Representatives, departed this life on August 11, 2013. And whereas Representative Friedman was born March 21, 1930 in Denver, Colorado to Louise and Lester Friedman. And whereas Representative Friedman earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from Wesleyan College and went on to earn a master's degree in labor relations from the University of California, Berkeley. And whereas in 1962, Representative Friedman ran for his first of 6 terms as state representative from Denver and served until 1976. And whereas in 1976, Representative Friedman ran for congressional office and experienced his only political loss. And whereas as active community leader, Representative Friedman was a founding member and past president of Temple Micah and former board president of the B'nai B'rith Lodge, and he also served as a board member of the Anti-Defamation League, University of Denver's Bridge Project, and the Hemophilia Foundation. And whereas Representative Friedman, a third-generation Denverite, was well known for being a talk radio host on channels KOA, KIMN, and KTLN. And whereas, perhaps because of his radio host background, during his time in the House of Representatives, Representative Friedman was, according to his wife Jeannie Friedman, brief in his remarks at the podium, often quoted, and wasn't above throwing in humor to make a point. And whereas Representative Friedman served on many committees during his time in the legislature, including the Finance, Appropriations, and House Services Committees, and he was also a past chair of the Joint Budget Committee. And whereas Representative Friedman is also remembered for sponsoring the first clean air legislation in the nation. And whereas, in addition to his service in the legislature, Representative Friedman also served on the Denver Water Board, consulted for the Environmental Protection Agency, and consulted for the Colorado Commission on Higher Education. And whereas, known for his sense of humor and wit, Representative Friedman was well respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle and will be remembered for his intellect, humor, and accomplishments. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly of the State of Colorado that, in the death of Don Friedman, the people of the state of Colorado have lost a dedicated public servant and outstanding citizen, and that we, the members of the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly, do hereby extend our deep and heartfelt sympathy to the members of his family and pay tribute to a man who served his state well and faithfully. Be it further resolved that a copy of this memorial be sent to Representative Friedman's wife, Jeannie Friedman, his daughter, Rabbi Dale Friedman, his son, Glenn Friedman, former state representatives Steve Durham, Tom Grimshaw, Rich Gebhardt, and Bob Kirsch, and the Colorado Republican Party.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I rise in support of House Memorial 1003 to speak about former Representative Friedman. And 3 things that I sort of gathered from doing some research and talking to his family and researching for the memorial. One is he had a good sense of humor. I think we need a lot more of that in this house. As you can tell, I'm wearing kind of my flashy outfit today, and I figured I'd do that in his honor. Hopefully he would have been honored to be honored that way. Second, he was pretty bipartisan, as I understand it, and we certainly need a lot more of that around here too. And so I hope to start with me. You know, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. So I'll do my best to be more bipartisan, and let's remember him for that way as well. Another thing is that he had guts because he worked on some environmental laws at a time when that was all very new in this country, and so he was a pioneer in a lot of ways. So, but there'll be certainly some former members who will be speaking a little bit more to experiences with him. And so I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, under Rule 26F, I request a 5-minute recess.
Representative Rosenthal, let us have current members speak before we allow former members.
My apologies. Thank you.
Representative Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to join in this memorial for Representative Friedman. In 1968, way back when, I was in a class with his, at that time, wife, and we got along pretty well, and she'd invite me over to the house, and actually she hosted a small 21st birthday party for me in 1968, and I remember, Representative Rosenthal mentioned that Representative Friedman was brief in his remarks. I remember those breakfast table conversations were not nearly as brief as perhaps he was on the floor. We had some very interesting conversations. We were on far opposite sides of the aisle, as perhaps we might well be today. But I learned a lot from him, and he really started my interest in how things work in the state of Colorado. I know he was on the Joint Budget Committee, and all those years I thought that was a pretty important place to be. And when I came into the legislature, I thought following his footsteps, that's what I should do. But then I realized how much work it was and was able to pass that on to somebody else. But I have very fond memories of long discussions and long debates with Representative Friedman, and I learned a lot from him, and I honor his service for the state of Colorado.
Seeing no further discussion, the House will be in a brief recess to hear from former members on the memorial. We could have former members come to the well. I'll call on Representative. Yeah. Representative Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, wife Jeannie Friedman, son Glenn, and daughter Dale. Let me thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity for former members to spend a few moments to share some thoughts and memories about our departed colleague. I do think two observations. One, Representative Rosenthal is actually dressed quite tastefully compared to the way that Representative Friedman often dressed. And secondly, I think the comments about his brevity at the microphone are somewhat exaggerated. The former Representative Kirsch, who was the majority leader at the time when Representative Friedman was conducting a filibuster, and for a change, Don actually ran out of things to say, so he started reading the phone book. And the majority leader admonished him that he was not speaking in a manner that was germane to the bill, to which his response was he was simply reading a list of people who didn't care about the bill. I thought it was germane, but Representative Kirsch threatened to have him removed from the chambers, so we did have a difference of opinion. Don was well known for his sense of humor and his very glib responses, but more importantly, Don performed a great service for his state and for this nation and for his family with his public service. It's easy to catalog the accomplishments of a legislator in terms of the legislation that survives. And in Don's case, there is much that does survive. The Clean Air Act, one of the first in the United States. Also, Don was a champion for freedom of choice. He worked tirelessly for the things he believed, and perhaps in terms of the content of his character, he was willing, and I'm sure you've all had the experience at some point in time of being the only one standing on a second reading vote. He was perfectly willing to do it take the heat, defend his principles, and add to the character of this body. It is important, I think, for all of us who have the opportunity to serve here to deal with that old adage that the evil men do live after them, the good is oft interred with their bones. In the case of our departed colleague, Representative Don Friedman, the good lives on in his good works, in his legislative record, and his fine family. And once again, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today.
Thank you, Representative Durham. Representative Kirsch.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, the Friedman family, and guests. I was a member of this body from 1971 to 1986. It was kind of my home, away from home, and many of you probably feel that way as well. I want to say right at the outset that I've done several of these since I left the legislature in 1986, and I always remind you to pay careful attention to what we do because you're going to be doing this job sooner than you want to. I think as I look at the record of Don Friedman, the pictures here pretty well tell the story. When I walked over here this morning, I was thinking, now how can I paint a picture of Don Friedman that would tell everything there is to say about him? And looking at these pictures, it pretty well expresses what Don Friedman was all about. First of all, he was a conflict. He was a Republican from Denver, and there weren't very many of those then, and aren't too many of those today. But being a Republican then was maybe a little different than now. But Don Friedman marched to his own drummer. Nobody told him what to do or when to do it. He, first of all, they mentioned at the outset that he had a great sense of humor, which he did. He was a fiscal conservative, which fiscal conservatives aren't noted for their sense of humor, but Don could carry off a lot of things with that sense of humor, including selling a budget. I don't know that anybody in this process, in the history or for a long time to come, had the ability to pull together a committee as Don Friedman and Senator Joe Shoemaker were able to do with the Joint Budget Committee. When the budget came out, they worked together as a team. Matter of fact, some of the greatest fights in the history of this state over budgetary prerogatives and the intent of the legislature and legislative prerogative, the Budget Committee and the governor, which, first of all, the House was Republican then, the Senate was Republican, the executive branch was Republican, and they fought like you've not seen fights like occurred in those days. You read back on the history of some of the battles between the Budget Committee and the governor, and they were very intense. And yet Don Friedman was not only able to survive, he succeeded in many of the things he set out to accomplish. And you look around you, the Auraria campus, the South Platte Water Development Project, there were so many things in the history of this state that were accomplished as a result of the teamwork that Don Friedman was able to put together. But I think, as I look back, as important as that is, probably the most important work that Representative Friedman did here was in the area of civil rights and civil liberties. If you dared bring a bill that spoke of censorship or anything of that order that he felt treaded upon people's civil liberties, he would be right here talking about it at this microphone and fighting vociferously for what he believed in, but with that sense of humor. He also was a very strong advocate of this process. He believed in the rule book. Matter of fact, I can remember many times being at this microphone in various positions that I served, and might be discussing an issue, and from the corner of my eye, I could see former Representative Durham and Representative Friedman together, nodding, looking at the rule book, and I knew that I was in trouble. I didn't know what I had done or how I transgressed the rules, but I knew within a moment or two Don Friedman would be here to call me on it, and he was almost always right on what he said about the rule book. He knew it backwards and forwards, believed in it, and he did love this process and defended it mightily. All I can say about Don Friedman in conclusion is he served the state extremely well. He did it with a sense of humor. He was gracious about the way he treated people. At the time, we didn't have office. Not only didn't have an office building here, but we didn't have offices. The office was your desk. And in some regards, that was good because both sides of the aisle could mix together and talk about things. But when it came to Don Friedman, it was a bit of a disadvantage because you couldn't get away from him. And while he had a sense of humor, sometimes, Jeannie, that sense of humor was a bit corny. I didn't always understand his jokes, but I attempted to laugh, and I'd get home and I'd say, now what did that mean? And as I thought about it, I'd say it really did have a meaning. He really did know what he was talking about, even though it didn't sound like it at the time, because he was so far ahead of me and other people at the time with his wit. He was a very bright guy. But he served the state well. He served this House of Representatives with honor and distinction and defended it with everything he had. And I hope as time goes by that as we look upon the history of people like Don Friedman, that we can all come together and work as a team on things that we all believe in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. It's an honor.
Representative Gephardt.
Mr. Speaker, thank you also for letting us come here this morning for a few minutes. I say hello to Jeannie and Doyle and Len, a couple of young grandchildren back there. First time he's had a tie on for a long time, I'll bet. Anyway, at any rate, I served in this chamber for the first time 49 years ago in the 1965 legislature. And I served with Don for 4 years, and we became quite good friends here. A lot of what the former speaker said are completely accurate, about he was a real individual. And what I wanted to point out a little bit about the history that was in effect when we were down here. You have to remember that the 1964 election is what triggered the 65 members here. And the Republican Party had 42 votes the day before the election, and the Democrats had 23 votes. And the presidential election was Goldwater and President Johnson, and the nation was still dealing with the emotional scars of the Kennedy assassination at that time. But at any rate, from 42-23 on the night before election, when Representative Friedman went to bed, the next night it was 42 Democrats and 23 Republicans. It was a complete flip. With the help of my friend Bart Miller and Molly Otto down in the library, fabulous resource people, we found that only 1 or 2 other times in the past 100 years has there been that big a swing in 1 2-year cycle as such. But our friendship began then when I showed up here on the opening day. They assigned me a seat where Representative Priola was hanging out, and Representative Friedman is over where the former speaker now resides. And when I came into the building, it might be interesting to make this little footnote. Representative Kearse said it was still very much all of state government here. It was totally state government. Every constitutional office, including the judiciary, was here, and the elevators were operated by state employees. I remember stepping on the elevator, and I told my grandchildren this. Standing on the elevator with me was Chief Justice O. Otto Moore, and next to him was Attorney General Duke Dunbar. And what they made it clear, though, was that as legislators, we were to go straight to our chamber and please don't disturb the rest of state government when you were here. And that's why the reference to having no offices and so forth. So, former Speaker, that was Don Friedman's private office suite over there. It was very spacious, as you can tell. At any rate, one of the half a dozen people that first came over to say hello to me when I got here was Don Friedman. And Don was sitting over there, I was over there, and he came up and he was very cordial and said something to the effect that you'll have to understand for a few days here that our side of the aisle is going to take a while to get used to what happened. Another thing to touch on is that was the first election in '64 where there was single districts for legislators. Prior to that time, the number of legislators was determined by a county's population, and legislators ran at large. One of the remarkable things about Don Friedman winning his first term is that Denver at that time didn't have districts when he ran, and there were 17 seats in Denver, and they all ran at large. And how the voters figured out who to vote for is beyond me. Maybe they didn't figure it out. At any rate, the Supreme Court, almost immediately after we took office, turned around and said that single districts were unconstitutional. So they threw it backwards again, and so they went back to the at-large for 1 2-year term, and then they got it straightened out, and it's been districts ever since. That's kind of, I think, an interesting piece of history. Looking back on my friendship with Don over the years, we also belonged to somewhat of a semi-exclusive club. It's got a fair number of members in it, but there's a certain number of legislators who somewhere in their career get this very strong feeling, almost like a calling from someplace, that they're supposed to be in Washington, D.C., taking care of the nation's business instead of the state of Colorado's. Don and I both succumbed to that, but wisely the voters defeated both of us when we tried. So it was, it went along in that general direction. I wanted to say a couple of things about Don without being too repetitive to what my colleagues had to say. There's two parts to it. One is what I said, his Profiles in Courage life, which both the former speakers had mentioned, in the sense of his strong principle and standing for things. The first air pollution control bill against polluters came up in our session, and Don and I were co-sponsors. We were both on State Affairs Committee. I was vice chair, and that was a very, very bitter, hard-fought battle, and it ended up going to conference committee. Back then, conferees kind of met semi in secret. The public wasn't allowed in, the press wasn't allowed in, and so forth. But there was this turmoil all over outside the hearing room, and it got so vociferous with people wanting to be heard or being angry because they knew the bill was likely going to pass, that we actually sent down to the first floor and asked Governor Love if he could send a couple of state patrolmen up to sort of patrol outside the conference room, which they did. And then we suggested to the State Patrol, they might want to stick around and help us get back to our seats in the House. And it turned out the bill passed. He was a prominent sponsor, an eloquent spokesman. That session also passed the first fair housing bill in the United States, and it took on another tone of its own, but did pass, and Don Friedman was very active in that as we went along. So things were bouncing along, but I thought that was kind of a profile and courage thing that he took on. I was reminded about it because I was looking at some pictures, not the ones here, that I had, and one picture showed John Love signing the bill with the members of the conference committee arrayed behind his desk. It was a very special time. The other part of Don Friedman was touched on a little bit by prior speakers, but this is the Don Friedman I remember and fell in love with, and we stayed in touch for many years. Representative Friedman was not capable of sitting down for more than a few seconds at a time. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, he was over in your area. But he was never, I mean never, in his seat. You'd look around all over the place. He'd be on that side walking around. He'd be in the back. He'd be down at the press table talking to the press. He'd be up the center aisle. All of this while the session was going on, of course. And on occasion, he would mount the rostrum and give advice to whoever was up there at the time. And I might say he was up there talking to Mr. Speaker sometimes, which not many legislators were willing to attempt as such. But he also was willing at any time to offer his own observations at the same place that I'm standing about what was going on. He always did it with some levity, some humor, but you didn't have to look very far to see that he also felt pretty strongly. And we all learned to pay some attention, not always agreeing, but always paying some attention. I guess it's some risk if we didn't as such. And, but this incessant movement, which I think the other colleagues probably are aware of, he just needed to keep moving at all times. I had a great friend and colleague who came in with me named Kenny Montford, and we used to, on a lot of days, make a funny bet as to which one of us was going to be able to find out where Representative Friedman was on the floor at any point in time. At any rate, this was a real gentleman, a decent man, tribute to his family, tribute to his state. He lived a life extremely well and was a major part in the history of Colorado. And again, I'm grateful to share these comments with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Gephardt. The House will come back to order. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question for the House is the passage of House Memorial 1003. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Close the machine. With 63 aye votes, 0 no votes, 2 excused, and 0 absent, the House Memorial 1003 is adopted. Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the current roll call of the House be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be made the co-sponsors of House Memorial 1003. Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to introduce the guests we have in the chamber today in honor of the memorial to the Honorable Don Friedman. And so first we have Jeannie Friedman, his wife, Glenn Friedman, his son, Rabbi Dale Friedman, his daughter, Stephen and Laura Duras, his son and daughter-in-law, Connor and Blake Duras, his grandkids. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Rosenthal. Mr. Kohler, please read the title to House Memorial 1004.
House Memorial 1004 by Representative Tyler, memorializing former Representative Theodore Eaker.
Representative Tyler.
Mr. Speaker and members, I move for the adoption of HM 1004 and ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Kohler.
Whereas our respected former colleague, Theodore Ted Eaker, a former member of the Colorado House of Representatives, departed this life on September 17, 2013 at the age of 91. And whereas Representative Eaker was born on August 13, 1922 in Denver, Colorado, to August and Frieda Eaker. And whereas Representative Eaker grew up in North Denver and attended Emmaus Lutheran School and Skinner Junior High and graduated from North Denver High School in 1940. And whereas in 1942, Representative Eaker received an associate degree in business from the University of Denver, and that same year joined the Army Air Corps, with which he served 3 years in the Philippines, New Guinea, and Japan, and was awarded 12 combat medals and 2 presidential citations. And whereas upon returning home, Representative Eaker met and married Betty Seiler, and they had 5 children, Phyllis, Peggy, Ken, Roy, and Tom. And whereas Representative Eaker later married Juanita Young and became stepfather to her son, Robert. And whereas Representative Eaker served as president of the family-owned retail dry goods and clothing stores Eakers, which under his leadership grew to 26 stores located throughout Colorado. And whereas Representative Eaker was active in his community, serving on the board of directors for Lutheran Tuberculosis Sanitarium as part of a team that converted it into a much-needed hospital to serve Jefferson County, now known as Exemplo Lutheran in Wheat Ridge, and also served as a member of the Colorado Retail Council, Colorado Association of Commerce and Industry, Colorado Shippers Cooperative, Mountain States Employers Council, Industries for Jefferson County, Spirit of 76 to bolster support for hosting the Olympics in Colorado, Lakewood Chamber of Commerce, Community College West Campus, Kiwanis, Lions Club, the Board of Directors for North Denver Bank and Central Bank of North Denver, and on financial and stewardship church committees. And whereas in 1969, Representative Eaker helped to bring about a successful incorporation effort to establish the city of Lakewood and was then elected to serve on the Lakewood City Council for 2 terms. And whereas in 1973, Representative Eaker was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives to represent House District 23. And whereas Representative Eaker served on the Business Affairs, Finance, and Transportation and Highways committees. And whereas Representative Eaker was passionate about education and sponsored legislation to increase funding for community education programs and increase monthly payments to the State Teachers Emeritus Retirement Fund, all of which proposals eventually became law. And whereas Representative Eaker's tenure in the General Assembly, as well as his life as a whole, was distinguished by honesty and enthusiasm in all he did. And whereas Representative Eaker brought people and businesses together, made communities greater places to live, and used integrity and wisdom in making decisions. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly of the State of Colorado that in the death of Representative Theodore Eaker, the people of the State of Colorado have lost a dedicated public servant and outstanding citizen, and that we, the members of the House of Representatives, do hereby extend our deep and heartfelt sympathy to the members of his family and pay tribute to a man who served his state well and faithfully. Be it further resolved that copies of this memorial be sent to Representative Eaker's children and their families, daughter Phyllis Casa and her husband Stephen of Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and their children Christine and Cara, son Kenneth Eaker and his wife Deborah of Granby, Colorado, and their children Scott, Caitlin, and Tammy, son Roy Eaker of Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and his children Emma, Zachary, and Theodore, son Thomas Eaker and his wife Sue of Arvada, Colorado, and their children Laura and Daniel, son Robert Young and his wife Betty of Jamestown, Colorado, and their children Sarah, Aaron, and Andrew, and grandchildren Melissa, Priscilla, and Casey Houston of Thornton, Colorado.
Representative Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say it is indeed an honor to support this memorial for Representative Eaker, who represents a lot of sort of the foundation of my community, of my district in Lakewood. He was one of the founders of Lakewood, as many of you know. It was founded in 1969 and has come to be a very strong community in, just west of Denver. And as his family remembers, he was the first person elected in House District 23 when I just discovered this morning, we ran in House districts. I thought we did that all the time. We had 65 representatives. We always ran in House districts. But I guess that's not the case. And he was the first one that was elected from a particular district called 23 that had their own voters. He also served on the Transportation and Highways Committee. We call that today Transportation and Energy Committee, which I'm honored to chair. So I see him as a founding member of our community, of my city, and started a very good history of having folks from Lakewood work on the transportation and energy area. So for that, I'm proud to ask for your consideration of the memorial for Ted Eaker and the work that he did in the legislature and the time that he was there.
Representative Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you all know how much I love babies. And Representative Eaker's great-granddaughter, Kinsley, is in the back of the room, and I've just, oh, where is she? She's right over here, and she was born the day he died. So isn't that just precious? And she was letting me hold her for a few minutes, but I was afraid I might scare her if I brought her down here. Anyway, his great-granddaughter is here to honor him as well. Thank you.
Is there any Representative Tyler or Representative Pabon?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, well, I didn't have an opportunity to meet Representative Eaker in person. I couldn't help but notice his biography and where he grew up and spent his formative years, which is in North Denver. And I have said this many times in the well, and I'll say this again. All great people at some point pass through North Denver. And I think given Representative Eaker's success in life, his accomplishments, everything he's done here, I think that continues to hold true. And I know that Representative Max Tyler at one point lived in North Denver, as did Representative Court, Representative Kraft Tharp, Representative May, and many others, the greatest of the great. And so I just wanted to recognize Representative Eaker's upbringing, and I'm sure there's fond memories that the family still has, and there may still be constituents of mine who live in North Denver who are relatives of his, but want to acknowledge his upbringing and his background. And I think, again, it holds true. All great people come through North Denver. Thank you.
Representative Rydin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was just sitting in the back there thinking, oh my gosh, my mother-in-law, Louise Rydin, worked for Eakers over in Athmar Park for many years. And she always just loved working there. The other salespeople and the people in the store, and certainly Mr. Eaker, were just great friends and supporters, and they just had a really great time working over there. And I know that she helped a lot of families put blue jeans on their kids. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. Your dad, grandfather, great-grandfather, you know, was a good guy and did a lot of great things, and I know that she always held them in the highest regard. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question for the House is the adoption of House Memorial 1004. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine, and members proceed to vote. Representatives Rydin and Coram. Representative Coram excused. Close the machine. With 62 aye votes, 0 no votes, 3 excused, and 0 absent, House Memorial 1004 is adopted. Representative Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there's no objection, I would move the current roll call of the House be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call of the House will make co-sponsors of House Memorial 1004. Representative Tyler.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to introduce the guests we have in the chamber today for the Honorable Ted Eaker. Phyllis Cosa, his daughter, Christine and Kara, grandchildren, Kenneth Eaker and his spouse, Deborah, Scott, Caitlin, and Tammy, the grandchildren, Roy Eaker, with Emma, Zachary, and Theodore C. as grandchildren. Tom Eaker and his spouse Sue, with Laura and Daniel as grandchildren. And Robert P. Young, his spouse Betty, with grandchildren Sarah, Aaron, and Andrew. And grandchildren Melissa, Priscilla, and Casey. And I don't think I got the name of the great-granddaughter, but welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming out to honor your father and grandfather.
Thank you, Representative Tyler. Members, we will now proceed to our next order of business, third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the House Bill 1273.
House Bill 1273, Representatives McCann and Wright, all Senators Newell and Schwartz, concerning human trafficking in connection with making and reducing appropriations.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1273 on third reading and final passage.
Representative McCann.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I humbly request permission to file a third reading amendment.
Please explain what you want to do on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it turned out that one of the bills that's already been passed, House Bill 1148, the Victims' Rights Bill, had a reference to human trafficking under the old law. So with the passage of 1273, the human trafficking statute has been changed if we pass 1273. So this amendment.
Yeah, no, I have it right now. Ron doesn't have it. Sorry. We're just getting the right one up there.
I see. It's, well, let me start over. I move, well, no, I have
No,
asked
you have to get permission first. So just explain what the amendment does, and we'll decide if we'll give you
So
permission.
it's really just a technical amendment to make sure that if 1273 passes, that the language in 1148, which is already passed, is consistent with the new statutory citation and language in 1273. So this was brought to our attention by the revisers.
Any further discussion on permission? Seeing none, the question for the House is to grant permission to Representative McCann to offer a third reading amendment. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine, and members proceed to vote. Close the machine with 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent. Representative McCann is granted permission to offer a third reading amendment. Representative McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Again, this was brought to our attention.
Could you please move the amendment now?
Yes, I would like to move Amendment L011 to House Bill 1273.
Okay.
And again, this was brought to our attention in order to make sure that a bill we've already passed is not inconsistent with this 1273 language. So I would ask for an aye vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the question for the House is the passage of Amendment L11 to House Bill 1273. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine, and members proceed to vote. Representative. Close the machine with 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent. Amendment 11 is passed. Seeing no further discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1273 as amended on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine, and members proceed to vote. Representative McLaughlin. Close the machine with 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent. House Bill 1273 as amended is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the House Bill 1275.
House Bill 1275 by Representatives Duran and Quorum, also Senators John and Roberts, concerning authorization of the Parks and Wildlife Commission to purchase real property to build a multi-use shooting facility.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move for the passage of House Bill 1275 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1275 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representatives Conti and Gardner. Close the machine. With 40 aye votes, 24 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1275 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the House Bill 1321.
House Bill 1321 by Representative Young, also Senator King, concerning the membership of the Colorado Task Force on Drunk and Impaired Driving.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move for the passage of House Bill 1321 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1321 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representatives Quorum and Sonnenberg. Close the machine. With 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1321 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title to Senate Bill 146.
Senate Bill 146 by Senator Schwartz, also Representative Wilson, concerning information the Department of Transportation may consider when conducting a traffic investigation for the purpose of determining the appropriate speed limit for a portion of state highway for which a municipality has proposed a speed limit alteration.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move for the passage of Senate Bill 146 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of Senate Bill 146 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Close the machine. With 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excused, and 0 absent, Senate Bill 146 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read reports of committees of reference.
Committee on Appropriations, after consideration on the merits, committee recommends the following bills be amended and as so amended refer to the committee of the whole favor recommendation. House Bill 1119, House Bill 1127, House Bill 1159, House Bill 1178, House Bill 1204 be referred to the committee of the whole favor recommendation. House Bill 1209 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1211 and 1279 be amended and as so amended be referred to the committee of the whole favor recommendation. House Bill 1327 be referred to the committee of the whole favor recommendation. House Bill 1328 and 1329 be and 1331 be amended and as so amended be referred to the committee of the whole favor recommendation.
Is that everything, Mr. Kohler? Was that all of appropriations? Is anything coming to the floor? Or are they all going to approach?
No, some of them are coming to the floor.
The House will stand in a brief recess. The House will come back to order. Mr. Kohler, please continue reading reports of committees of reference.
The Committee on Agriculture, Livestock, and Natural Resources, after consideration on the merits, committee recommends following House Bill 1320 be amended as follows and necessary to refer to the Committee on the Whole Fair Recommendation. Senate Bill 115 be amended as follows and necessary to refer to the Committee on Legislative Council Favor Recommendation. The Committee on Education, after consideration on the merits, committee recommends following House Bill 1268 be postponed indefinitely. The Committee on State Veterans and Military Affairs, after consideration on the merits, committee recommends following House Bill 1354 be referred to the Committee on the Whole Fair Recommendation. Senate Bill 158 be referred to the Committee on the Whole Fair Recommendation. Senate Bill 161 be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the following bills be made special orders on April 8th, 2014 at 10:10 a.m. Those bills are House Bill 1330, 1327, 1328, 1329, 1331, 1127, 1204, 1269, 1338, 1178, 1119, 1211, 1159, 1320, and 1354.
Seeing no objection, the bills listed by the Assistant Majority Leader will be placed on the special orders for 10:10. Being that it is now 10:10, the House will proceed to our next order of business. Second reading special orders. Representative Salazar.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House now resolve the Committee of Special Orders.
You've heard the motion. Seeing no objection, the House will resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for consideration of special orders. Representative Salazar will take the chair.
Hello? Okay, let's get this party started. The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for reading a bill at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested, as they are printed and in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and not read until requested. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the Majority Leader, and the court rule is relaxed. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1330.
House Bill 1330, Representative Williams, All Center Talk Shop, concerning an update of telecommunications terminology for interstate telecommunications services.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1330 and the Business, Labor, Economic Workforce Development Committee report.
There's no committee report?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we move forward to the bill?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Representative Williams. To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, House Bill 1330 is one of the bills that's in a package of the telecom broadband reform bills. It updates outdated definitions and terminologies that are currently in statute. We have some definitions that are about 20 years old, and as you know, technology changes very quickly, and this updates technology. I ask you for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1330? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1330. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, no. House Bill 1330 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1327.
House Bill 1327 by Representatives Williams and Murray, also Senator Sheffield and Talk Drop, concerning measures to expand the deployment of communication networks in connection with enacting the Broadband Deployment Act.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. Yes, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1327 and the Business and Labor and Finance Committee reports.
Thank you, Representative Murray. To the Business, Finance, and Labor Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This defines broadband facility and
Sorry, Representative Murray. To the Finance report first.
thank you, Mr. Chair. It has some definitions and strikes several lines in the Finance Committee report.
Is there any
Urgent
further
I
discussion on the Finance Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Finance Committee report. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.
Yeah.
Finance Committee report passes. Representative Murray, to the Business Labor Committee report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This clarifies that wastewater lines and maintenance won't be hindered through other wording in the bill, and it defines broadband facility. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report? Seeing none, the question before...
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Murray.
I do have an amendment to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development report.
Yeah. Can I have you move that amendment?
I move Amendment L011.
Do you request that it be displayed on the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Murray. The amendment L011 is properly before us and properly displayed. Please proceed, Representative Murray.
Thank you. This language was requested at the request of a political subdivision, just to make clear what political subdivisions we were addressing in the bill. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on L011? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L011. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. L011 passes. To the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, this is a part of the broadband and telecommunications reform package. This bill ensures that we will be able to have a deployment of broadband. Basically, the meat of this policy is ensuring that we have some trenching opportunities to deploy our networks and have some relationships with CDOT, and it will faster the deployment through a permitting process, and I ask for an aye vote.
What's the business report?
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended. Yes, Representative Murray.
To the bill? Oh, no,
we have to pass on the committee report. All those in favor of the committee report, please say aye.
We're in a hurry to get out of here.
Those opposed, no. The Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amendment passes. To the bill, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill requires the local government permitting of broadband facilities and certain wireless services facilities to adhere to new statutory deadlines and to allow consolidation of applications for small cell networks. So what this does is simplify the process for our providers. It requires state and local government agencies, including coordination by the Department of Transportation, to provide notice of trenching activity to broadband providers, except in emergencies, emergencies and to regulate other aspects of trenching. And it clarifies that broadband service providers may use public rights-of-way for broadband facilities to the same extent as other telecommunications providers. This will allow our providers to have easier access to trenches that might be built all over the state, and hopefully this will allow more broadband capability in our state. I urge an aye vote for this bill.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1327? Yes, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representatives. So with the amendment that was put on in Finance, we didn't get a chance to get a revised fiscal note. So in appropriations, did that for sure take out the $2 million that was in there with the, so did that fix that?
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, exactly right. Because the tax exemption was removed, there is no fiscal note.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1327? Yes, Representative Mitch Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Murray. Thank you, Representative Williams, for bringing this bill. It's critical for all of Colorado, but it's especially critical for rural areas of Colorado because of its linking of local control and also CDOT projects and trenching. So thank you.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1327? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1327 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1327 as amended passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1328.
House Bill 1328, Representatives Williams and Quorum, all Senators Nicholson and Crowder, concerning the deployment of broadband into unserved areas of Colorado through grant making for monies allocated from the Colorado High Cost Support Mechanism.
Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move House Bill 1328 and the Business, Labor, and Economic Workforce Committee report.
Thank you, Representative Quorum. To the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce.
You want to do that?
I'm sorry.
And I move the Appropriations Committee report.
Okay, there's an Appropriations Committee report. So to the Appropriations Committee report, Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We actually did a lot of work, basically just clarification work, changing access to broadband, infrastructure descriptions, the building constructions, allocations, just a lot of cleanup that was necessary with all the task force that we worked with on this. So,
is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Appropriations Committee report passes. Representative Quorum to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report.
Thank you. The Appropriations Committee report.
I'm sorry, sir. Do you have a Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce
Business, Labor, and Economic report?
Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Business, Labor, Economic, Workforce Development Committee report made some technical changes. We added some definitions defining the broadband fund for infrastructure only and not operations, and I ask for an aye vote.
Do you have any amendments to the business?
We will after we.
Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move L006 and ask for it to be displayed.
Amendment L006 has been properly moved and is before us and properly displayed. Representative Williams to L006.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, this amends the Business, Labor, Economic, Workforce Development Committee report. And basically, we do have a board who will be the those who will determine how the grants are provided, and so we did add nonprofit telephone cooperatives and its affiliates and the subsidiaries, and we also defined the incumbent provider, and I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L006? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L006 to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. Okay. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. L006 passes. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L007 and ask that it be displayed.
Amendment L007 has been properly moved and is properly before us and is properly displayed. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this amends the Business, Labor, Economic Workforce Development Committee report, and we wanted to ensure that those on the board have 3 voting members for local entities, and we added a position for the county commissioner, one who is a mayor or a council person, and another representative from a local entity, and I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L007? Yes, Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Representative Williams, in this amendment, what do you do if you have an unincorporated area that doesn't have an incorporated community? Do you get 2 commissioners? Because if you're adding 3 people, some of us don't have real communities.
Representative Williams.
Thank you for the question, Representative Giroux. Currently, we have not added anyone who is on the unincorporated areas, but we have other positions to ensure that we have those voices heard from the local communities.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L007? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L007 to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. Yes, Representative Quorum?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move L008.
We haven't passed L007 yet, Representative Quorum? Okay. Do I need him to withdraw that motion? I do need you to withdraw that motion.
I would like to withdraw L008.
Thank you, sir. All righty, so the question before us is the adoption of L007 to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. L007 is passed. Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I would like to move L008.
Thanks, sir.
Ask that it be displayed.
L008 has been properly moved and properly displayed. To L008, Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of the previous amendments of changing the board, page 10, line 22, strike Speaker of the House, Representative and Substitute Governor. That's a governor appointment. Under D, one who represents a cable provider as appointed by the President of the Senate, one whom represents a rural local exchange carrier as appointed by the governor, one who represents a competitive exchange carrier as appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Line 12, page 11 of the bill, strike Senate and substitute House, and page 11, urban, and to insert unserved. And 14, strike President of the Senate and substitute Speaker of the House. The reason this is happening is the actual voting members of this board are 15, so it gives 5 for the House, 5 for the Senate, and 5 for the governor. So, and it also brought in all the potential providers, representatives, all 6 of those. So thank you.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L008? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L008 to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, no. The ayes have it. L008 passes. To the bill, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. Hold on. We're to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the Business, Labor, Economic, Workforce Development Committee report, as Mr. Quorum, Representative Quorum has shared with you, we made some changes. What this is going to do is make sure we have some broadband services in rural Colorado. We made some technical changes, and I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Mitch Bush to the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Corum. Thank you, Representative Wilson. Williams, I'm so sorry, Representative Williams. You and I, all of you and I have talked about this term, but since the term shows up in the committee report on lines 4 through 8, could you help us all with the term unserved?
Representative Corum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Underserved, basically, we follow the FCC standards. At the current time, they are 4 down and 1 up. If you are not meeting those standards, you are underserved.
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended? Yes, Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I'm sure that you all have received an email or two or a phone call from AARP, and that all these telecommunication bills are going to wipe out landlines. I too have received those, and I visited with both the bill sponsors about this, and they've assured me that that's not going to happen. But I would like to, I would move L010 and ask that it be displayed.
Sir, you said that you would like to move, so could you please move it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I thought I corrected myself there. I would move L010.
Thank you, sir. The amendment L010 is properly before us and properly displayed. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment's rather simple. It just puts in item 11 and puts in verbiage what we all say and what we all know about these bills, but it simply documents nothing in this section affects existing landlines in Colorado. I know that none of you have ever had that experience, but it's been my experience before that politicians told me one thing and did another, and this would simply guarantee that the landlines would be protected, and I would urge an aye vote.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to ask for a title ruling.
Well, it's gonna fit under the title, but it's...
Yeah. The committee will... Okay, keep going. Committee will take a brief recess. The House will come back to order. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the fact that this may need to go on another bill, even though the fear does not, what do I want to say, delete the concern from 1328, I will withdraw my amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. So then that leaves us back to the committee report. Is there any further discussion on the committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report as amended passes. Now we're to the bill. Representative Corum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would simply say This is a bill that has been a long time in the making. I started working in rural Colorado. If we want a bill for rural Colorado should have been at the table. And so I started working with Club 20, expanded into Action 22, Progressive 15, held many, many meetings, worked with all the providers, all the stakeholders, elected officials, citizens, held public meetings in Fairplay and Lyman, and it's a bill that's simply taken a lot of time to put together, but it is a bill that we do have consensus on from all, so I ask for a yes vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1328 as amended? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1328 as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1328 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1329.
House Bill 1329 by Representatives Williams and Murray, also Senators Kerr and Sheffield, concerning the exemption of certain Internet Protocol-enabled services from oversight by the Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, sir. Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1329 as well as the committee reports for business, labor, economic, and workforce development, and also appropriations.
Thank you, Representative Murray. To the Appropriations Committee report.
The Appropriations Committee report just appropriates money to the project.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The Appropriations Committee report passes. Representative Murray, please, to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report just clarifies the complaint process in two different places in the bill. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. This is really close. The ayes have it. The Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report passes. Representative Murray, to the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is similar to one that we passed, I think, unanimously out of the House last year. And what it does is it regulates, removes regulation from advanced telephone services, that is call waiting, three-way calling, and premium telephone services. Also Internet Protocol-enabled service, most long-distance services, private line service, certain operator services, and any telecommunication product or service not otherwise defined. It also amends and adds, this is very important, statutory definitions for certain telecommunications products, services, and providers subject to regulation and exempt from regulation. Finally, the bill clarifies that it does not affect the scope or effect of PUC authority relative to the wholesale telecommunications market, federal telecommunications program, or basic emergency service, that is 911, is still under regulatory authority of the PUC. I urge an aye vote on this bill.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in opposition to House Bill 1329. I guess my concern is, this is a very new technology, voice over internet, and my concern is that what we're going to be doing is sort of disarming ourselves before we're able to really understand the full ramifications of where this industry is going. And so my question to Representative Murray is, what are some of the rules and regulations, let's just say that even though it is deregulating, what are some of the parameters we still are going to retain in law and in order to make sure that consumers are protected? Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your question, Representative Rosenthal. It's a very good one. What I would point out is this bill memorializes what is already happening in the market. In other words, the PUC is not currently regulating in this arena. So what we're doing is clarifying that that will continue. And as far as your question about what still will be under the jurisdiction of the PUC, it is the wholesale telecommunications market, any federal telecommunications program, or basic emergency service, that is 911. Those will still be under the PUC.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your response, Representative Murray. I guess another one of my concerns, and you just brought it up, it's sort of memorializing current practice into law, and that is my concern, because if we do that, then I think all of us in this chamber are very well aware it's very difficult in the future to make changes to law once we've adopted something. Would you agree with that?
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I do have to respectfully disagree with that, Representative Rosenthal, because that's what we do in this building, is make law. And I think that if our constituents are saying that somehow they are being harmed by deregulation of Internet services, that we would be paying attention to that and quickly change this law. So right now, this particular bill is about Internet protocol services only.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1329? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1329. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1329 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1331.
House Bill 1331 by Representatives Williams and Murray, also Senators Nicholson and Kerr, concerning the regulation of basic local exchange service as it affects effective competition.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1331, the Appropriations Committee report, and the Business, Labor, Economic, Workforce Development Committee report.
Thank you, Representative Williams. To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in Committee J001, basically appropriating the cash funds from the PUC Utility Fund, and I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hello. Oh, there we go. Opposed, no. The Appropriation Committee report passes. Representative Williams, please, to the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, in the Business, Labor, Economic, Workforce Development Committee report on L001, we just changed "or" to "and" to make sure that the statute is clarifying more specifically, and I ask you for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report? Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Williams, I know I've asked this question many times, and I talked to Representative Corum and yourself about this on the other one. Again, the concern that I have in my area is loss of landlines. It's not an issue in urban areas, in rural areas where a service call in South Park is one way 22 miles. Landlines sometimes work. Cell phones hardly ever work in those areas. What guarantee do we have in this bill that will guarantee landlines will not be affected and my constituents will have service?
Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you, Representative Wilson, for this question. This is actually a question that I asked over and over again to AARP when they were bringing it up around. Actually, I asked it a different way. I asked, where in this bill does it show that that we will lose landlines? And they were unable to answer that question. This bill is not about losing landlines. But, Representative Wilson, let's also be aware, landlines is yesterday's technology. So we don't want to get tied into yesterday's technology. We are moving on into new technology. What we want to ensure is that we're able to have broadband throughout the state, and that we're able to have the new technology for everyone across the state. So I would encourage you, come, let's fight for that. Let's not fight for a particular technology.
Representative Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Kraft-Tharp. And you make my point. It is yesterday's technology, but when it's the only technology you have, that's the concern. So the transition between new technology and the old technology leaves that gap. When I travel my district, I don't have cell service in many areas. Their only landline is a landline, and that is a lifeline to them. All I need is to ensure them that while this new technology is coming in, and when fiber optic is run rampant over South Park, that they will be covered. What happens in between? That's my concern, and that's the concern of my constituents.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Wilson, I want to thank you for your concern and your question. But if you refer back to the bill, we have put in this legislation many protections for consumers. And if you look at the bill, we make sure that the PUC establishes a mechanism in which the local areas without effective competition will remain under the PUC authority. And we also have language in there, and if you're familiar with the carrier or the provider of last resort, the PUC will remain to have the regulation over those areas.
Alrighty, members, remember that we are on the committee report, not the bill. So if you want to speak to the committee report, then let's speak to the committee report. I do have a queue right now. I have Representative Rosenthal, I have Representative Sonnenberg, and Representative Murray. Which of you is talking to the committee report?
I'll wait for the bill.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, is there any further discussion?
He's trying to decide whether to run it or not, and it's to the committee. But I have one.
Yes, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add one additional comment that the high cost fund is still in effect. So that is another incentive for the landline companies to continue to service those companies in addition to the regulatory authority of the PUC. So the high cost fund does not go away in rural Colorado. It is still in place and strong.
Is there any further discussion on the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Oh, don't make me go into Gregorian chant, y'all. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development Committee report passes. Now to the bill. Representative, and we did have a queue, Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in opposition to House Bill 1331. You know, and I understand, you know, the market forces. I understand emergence of new technologies and allowing companies to compete. But I think we should also look out for the consumers. Particularly, we've heard a lot from seniors who are very concerned about their landlines. And while it may be yesterday's technology, just because it's from yesterday's technology doesn't mean it's bad or we should get rid of it. Sometimes people do appreciate having that landline. And even though I'm a Denver representative and I represent, you know, part of the city, cell phones aren't always great either. Sometimes I'm in my living room and my phone call goes away. You know, it's a dropped call. So a lot of people do have a necessity for a landline. And I guess the connection that we're drawing here is with deregulation. Are we saying, look, okay, so we're going to allow for more room for providers to say, okay, well, we're going to now raise rates on folks, and are we going to cut back on the offering of this kind of service? And so that is my question for the sponsors, is are we going to curtail offering landline service, And are we going to allow for raising rates? And I understand the bill does allow for raising rates, and it goes in sort of a step basis. But what about after the step basis in 2020 and 2022 and times after that? Thank you.
Representative Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Rosenthal, I understand why you have the concerns, because your seniors have been calling you just like my seniors have called me. And the reason they called is because they got a fear tactic from AARP. They got sent a card that says, your landlines are going to go away. Well, that absolutely isn't true. It's not true. They're using scare tactics, and it's wrong. Explain to me and figure it out here. Do the math. If the company that gets 54 of the 58 million is CenturyLink, and they don't have cells, all they have is landlines, why would they support this? Why would they support this if you're doing away with landlines? That's not happening, members. Unfortunately, AARP out of Washington, D.C. is driving this and driving the message. Don't listen to the message. Listen to the constituents and what's going on here in Colorado. No landlines are going to be lost. You're not going to lose landlines. Don't listen to the fear tactics. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever what they're telling you. Don't let fear guide this destruction, or fear destroy this movement. I ask for a yes vote on 1331.
Representative Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, whatever.
I have had many of the calls from the seniors, the disabled, and the hearing impaired, and I wondered if one of the sponsors could respond to their concerns. Is there any legitimate fear or concern they should have about losing landlines? I think Representative Sonnenberg already addressed that, but is there anything else you might want to say about the disabled, the hearing impaired, the elders, and the seniors?
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Representative Schaefer, for your question. And, you know, we had some comments here by Representative Sonnenberg that is a fear tactic is being used. But what I do want to share with you is if you look in the bill, in House Bill 1331, you'll see where we've taken a lot of strides in protecting consumers. One is that when the PUC determines where we have effective and ineffective competition, where we have areas of ineffective competition, then the PUC continues. The PUC continues to have authority over that. They continue to have authority over basic emergency services. They continue to, will have the authority in the event that a carrier might want to raise their rates. That discussion has to go through a process with the PUC and the carrier. So it prohibits any type, and there are programs in which we have addressed some of those who are the hearing impaired. And I'd love to share with you a survey that was done, and our carriers are taking care of these concerns of those of the elderly and the disabled and those who may be hearing impaired.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the description of AARP. I'm just trying to raise these issues on my own. I'm not like coordinating with anybody. I'm just I've always had a concern about deregulation, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a fear tactic, as we've seen, like in the energy market when that got deregulated. The chaotic nature of that, but also the fact that rates go up for consumers. And so that is really my concern. A lot of seniors are on fixed incomes, and I want to make sure that we're protecting our consumers. Another issue that was raised is the issue of security systems and how, let's just say the power goes out, what will happen to security systems? How will they interact? Let's just say it's an internet or a broadband service and for phone lines, and what if that goes out? How is the security system interacting with that? and also the system in general, that some are saying that security systems don't interact well with internet.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sponsors understand I know what's going on in the bill part. I don't have a problem with that. And I really appreciate Representative Sonnenberg clarifying what we're dealing with, but perception is reality. And we can say all we want in these bills and so forth, which I've noticed most of my constituents never read, so they don't understand that part. But what they understand is that when you start messing with something, something could go away. And that's a real fear to them. Whether it's real or imagined, I don't know. When Representative Sonnenberg gets older like I am, he'll understand some of those AARP fears. But the factor that I don't understand is why there isn't some way that we can clarify in this so the message goes out that we are simply retaining what we have while we move towards what we need. Because I have a hard time calling my constituents and saying, don't worry about it, trust me, I'm the government, nothing's going to happen to your landlines. I struggle with that. And I fully understand what we're trying to do, and I'm all for that, and I would love to be able to have all that in place today in my district. But it's not there. It won't be in the near future. And even as we move forward, we will still be the last ones to receive it. I've noticed that we in my district tend to be in the part of the state, as many of you are, when the fiber optic is run, it usually stops before it gets there. When new services come in, when wireless comes in, it tends to overshoot it, and you lose that service. All I'm asking for is some way, and there's got to be some way, I mean, we've got brilliant people in this chamber, there's got to be some way of assuring people that nothing's going to happen. That's my concern. Thank you.
Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As someone who is actually older than Representative Wilson, I believe, I do understand. And I really appreciate Representative Sonnenberg for bringing to light the fear tactic of AARP. But what you need to understand about cellular service, we're talking cellular service, you have to have landlines for cellular service to work. That signal goes from that tower and it goes to a landline, and it comes down and comes out up to the next tower where it finds your phone. So you are going to need that landline for a long time. But it's somewhat amusing to me that AARP is so concerned that you're going to lose your landline, yet what are they doing? They are marketing a cellular phone. If they're really serious about saving landlines, they need to stop selling cellular phones.
Representative Rosenthal, please, it's limited to the bill, no more comparing ages. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And my remarks address sort of what Representative Quorum talked about, but also to the bill. It is very important to grow both markets when you're talking about growing landlines, because some people do need a landline, whether you're in the city or you're in a rural area. And so, just because AARP is offering that service doesn't mean they're being disingenuous. It just means that they want to make sure if somebody needs a cell phone, they should get one. But they're also trying to make sure that there are members who live in all of our districts around the state to make sure that they can retain that landline if they so choose, and that they're not priced out of the market when the prices continue to rise or there are restrictions put on their service by the service providers because of deregulation.
Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, let's bring this discussion back to the bill, okay? So this bill does not eliminate landlines. This bill does not encourage landlines. This bill is not about what we should do in the marketplace around landlines. So there's nothing in that bill that's going to take away your landlines. So this other discussion is an important one, but I think it's an important one to have with our stakeholders. It's not about this bill. This bill is not going to do that.
Thank you. I was just missing the snap on that, Representative Kraft-Tharp. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to offer a little different perspective. AARP might not be so wrong, and just for an example, on if a broadband is going through, it may be at some point in time very expensive to maintain those old copper lines, and they may come out, but that doesn't mean that broadband won't provide that same kind of phone service that's very reliable, and broadband could also enable cell service as well. So it's possible they may go away and something may take its place. That may not be something to fear, but it's possible.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1331? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the conversation and the concerns. The sponsors have worked very hard to ensure that we're protecting all of the consumers in Colorado, and I want to ask you for an aye vote on House Bill 1331.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1331. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1331 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1127.
House Bill 1127, by Representative Quorum, all Senator Hodge, concerning disclosure of information for asset recovery.
Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move House Bill 1127 and the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you. Basically, this just created the the bill we're creating where the judgment money is paid in, and it creates a fund to handle that money.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The Appropriation Committee report passes. Representative Quorum, I believe it's a Judiciary Committee report?
You are correct.
Okay,
Thank you, and I move the Judiciary Committee report.
Thank you very much, sir. To the Judiciary Committee report.
Yes, thank you. In Judiciary, we had a great deal of discussion on this bill, and so what we came up with is a way that collection agencies do have the ability to collect a debt, and also created money for the Judiciary Fund. So that's basically what we did there.
Is there any further discussion on the Judiciary Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Judiciary Committee report. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The Judiciary Committee report passes. To the bill, Representative Quorum.
Thank you, members, and I ask for a yes vote on 1127 as amended.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1127? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1127. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1127 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1204.
House Bill 1204 by Representative Wilson, concerning flexibility regarding the requirements imposed on rural school districts.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move House Bill 1204 and the committee reports.
Which committee report, sir?
That would be, I think, Education and Appropriation.
Thank you, sir. To the Appropriations Committee report?
Oh, it's not amended.
Okay, I think your bill is unamended in the Appropriations Committee report.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. There is no Appropriation Committee report. They did not change the bill.
Okay. So then we are to the bill?
To the Education.
Or the Education Committee report. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Education Committee report, we had a strike below in the Education Committee. The strike below simplified the bill somewhat, took out the flexibility on giving charter waivers to the rural and small schools, and I certainly agreed with that, and I would ask for an aye vote on the Education Committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Education Committee report?
Representative Wilson.
Committee will stand in brief recess. The committee will come back to order. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your indulgence on that. We had a miscommunication there between Representative Rankin and I on who's going to submit this amendment. So I would move L004 as an amendment to the education report.
The amendment
and ask that it be displayed.
The amendment is properly before us and properly displayed. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Rankin brought to my attention the fact that we used a definition of rural and small schools, which is 1,000 and below, and there were a significant number of the rural and small schools that came in just above that level. So this amendment simply addresses the word 1,000 and makes it 1,200, which would include the schools that Representative Rankin was concerned about, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L004? Seeing none, yes, Representative Rankin?
Well, just to comment on, I had a suggested, I believe a friendly amendment. There are 11 school districts that fall between 1,000 and 1,200 students, so this significantly is a significant advantage to them, and thank you.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L004? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L004 to the Education Committee report. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Amendment L004 passes. Representative Wilson to the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would urge an aye vote on the committee report as amended.
Is there any further discussion on the Education Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Education Committee report as amended. Those in favor, say aye. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The Education Committee report as amended passes. To the bill, Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 14-1204 is rather simple. It allows rural and small schools that have earned the distinction of being accredited with distinction or accredited the ability to have flexibility in their reporting. It allows them to do reporting every other year rather than annually. It also allows them to enter into an agreement with their BOCES unit to allow them also flexibility through their BOCES unit, and I would recommend an aye vote.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Representative Wilson, I'm going to be voting for the bill, but if there is, the whole idea of the bill is being flexible. If there were anywhere in your heart you could see to allow those school districts that are currently so small and so scattered to gather together as one, we could actually serve them better as a state. And I think we could save the state money. I'm a yes vote on the bill, but I'm just saying that at some point in time, this has got to stop, and we've got to start gathering those school districts in. And I understand the mileage issue. I understand that. But it's becoming an issue of how far we can support K through 12. So I'll be a yes vote. I'll just I don't have a soapbox here, but that was my equivalent.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Giroux. And I certainly understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate the fact that you understand the mileage. But until you realize that students would be on the bus longer than they would be in class, in some of those districts, that presents a real challenge.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I understand that I haven't walked in your shoes. I don't think the students have to be on the bus that long because you can have multiple bus barns. For instance, in Jefferson County, which is all one school district, there's a bus barn in my district, which keeps those students from having to be on the bus for so long because we don't have a central bus barn. It's actually those administrators that I'm trying to condense. That's what I'm trying to do, because what ends up happening right now, Representative Wilson, is absolutely every one of your superintendents become the janitor, the grant writer. They do all those jobs. And if we had fewer superintendents, more consolidated school districts, and I know I'm going to be getting those emails, but that would be a better way to fund K through 12 in the state. But I'll be a yes vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1204? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1204. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 1204 passes. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1269 to the end of the calendar.
Thank you, sir. Is there any objections to laying over House Bill 1269 to the end of the calendar? Seeing none, House Bill 1269 will be laid over to the end of the calendar. All right, Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1338.
House Bill 1338, Representatives May and Giroux, Senators Hodge and Lambert, concerning planning for the effective use of Colorado's regional centers for persons with intellectual disabilities in connection with making appropriation.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1338, the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report, and the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, ma'am. To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, the Appropriations Committee report amended the bill to strike the Director of Research. It also struck lines 18 through 20. And after subdivision on page 8, line 4, inserted Executive Director's Office. I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none. The question before... Yes, Representative Giroux.
Yes, I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no other comments.
Thank you, Representative Giroux. Seeing no other further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. The Appropriation Committee report passes.
Yeah.
To the, and I believe you said Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I did. It's been moved.
Okay, thank you, Representative Giroux. Is there any further discussion on...
Mr. Chair, I need to explain it.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Please, to the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we made an amendment on the number of individuals to serve. We struck 12, put 14 in. Also on page 4, strikes 11 and 12 and substitutes a family member of the individual who resides in the Wheat Ridge Regional Center. We wanted to add a member from each of the regional centers. So there's one from Wheat Ridge, Grand Junction, and Pueblo Regional Center to be appointed by the Executive Director. We also struck ICF, IID beds and put regional centers for clarity. And then lastly, on page 7, we substituted state-operated regional center beds prior to December 31st, 2015, and struck line 22 through 24. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative Giroux. Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to move floor amendment L005 to the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report and ask that it be properly displayed.
L005 has been properly moved and properly displayed. Please proceed, Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what this amendment does is that during the testimony during Public Health and Human Services, we were asked to add a member of someone from behavioral health organization with expertise in this area. And so we added that. And the last thing that we did was instead of just saying that the department couldn't sell or sell a bed, what it does is, or close any waiver beds, what this does is that during the testimony, people were concerned that people were being transitioned out of the regional centers and the transition would fail and they didn't have a spot back at the regional centers. And what this does is saying if that transition is deemed a failure by the parent, the legal guardian, or the community center board, that they would can go back to the regional centers as long as they met the federal definition for appropriateness for the regional centers, that the department had to provide a bed. So I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to let the body know that I'm giving Easter gifts this year to my children. I'm going to be giving my daughter-in-law a set of emerald earrings. I'm giving my daughter a set of opal earrings, and I'm going to be giving the boys one is a traveling fedora. It's kind of a straw thing, but it's an Orvis, and it can be packed and moved around. And then for my son, I'm giving him an Orvis sweatshirt.
To the committee report, Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just saying if anybody was listening, and obviously don't tell my children what they're getting for Easter, please don't. But if you'd like to talk about what I have to pick up at King Soopers on the way home, I'd be happy to ask or talk to you offline. I asked for an aye vote.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, thank you, Representative Giroux. Yes, Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I just want to urge your aye vote on this amendment. I want to thank Representative May and Representative Giroux and the rest of the JBC for diligently working on this particular bill. We heard compelling testimony in committee about this, and transitions are a problem because no one's really defined what a successful transition is. People are being moved from the regional centers, but we don't know if there's a pathway for them to come back to the regional centers if that transition is in fact unsuccessful. So very important amendment. I urge your aye vote on it.
Representative Giroux to the amendment.
Trust. It's important to have trust, Mr. Chair. Representative Young, I appreciate your comments. Actually, there has been a lot of hard work on this. Representative May has been working double super overtime. And I really appreciate it. I might add that I was trying to get opal earrings for my daughter-in-law, but when I ordered and they came in, they were really cloudy.
Giroux to the amendment, please. Okay, sans any discussion on opal earrings, is there any further discussion on Amendment L005? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L005. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Amendment L005 passes. To the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report.
That was it. Oh, we already did that.
I thought that we had just amended it.
Oh.
Yes, Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just asked for an aye vote.
Thank you. Is there any further yes, Representative?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Is there any further discussion on the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report as amended? Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm really disappointed. We've gone through the whole morning and there's not been one fight. You know, I'm really kind of, I don't know what to do. I have to get in trouble because I can't handle this much.
Is this to the committee report?
No, it's just in general to the, I asked for an aye vote.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, no further questions or discussion. The question before us is the adoption of the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report as amended. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report as amended passes. I believe we are now to the bill.
Want to go?
Representative Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Giroux and Representative May for bringing this bill. Members, we heard a lot of emotional testimony when we heard this bill in committee. First, we do need a utilization study of the regional centers because not all of the regional centers can serve the persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And yet not all of these people with these disabilities are able to live out in the community. Some of them are better served in the centers, some of them are better served out in the community. So I think it's a very good bill that will help individualize the services for our persons with individual and intellectual disabilities, and I ask for your support.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Schaefer, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. And thank you for all the hard work that you've done for those communities. Besides goofing around, I'm very serious about the bill. It's a very good bill. As I said before, Representative May has worked very hard. It's something that we all feel on the Joint Budget Committee. We're passionate about making sure that we take care of this community. It's something that the Joint Budget Committee has in the past always supported. If you go back to Joe Shoemaker, they've always been supportive. I would like to thank the department because Human Services has taken some beatings this year. Director Bika and Sarah Siles, I appreciate what they've done. I appreciate the fact that they've been willing to sit down and talk to us. And I also want to thank the community, the DD community, for everything that they've been doing, their parents, their support. This is a very special group of people, and they deserve an aye vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1338 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1338 as amended passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1178.
House Bill 1178 by Representatives Ferrandino and Del Grosso, all Senators Hodge and Grantham, concerning a sales and use tax exemption for qualified property used in spaceflight.
Yes, Mr. Minority Leader Del Grosso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1178 and the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, sir, and welcome, Mr. Speaker. To the Appropriations Committee report, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Appropriations Committee report just simply put the appropriations clause on the bill. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The Appropriation Committee report passes. Do we have any other committee report? No? All right. Let's see here. To the bill, and I see that we have Representative Priola waiting. Representative Priola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to either of the members, where is Spacely Sprockets on this legislation? Did they testify in committee?
That question might be out of order. I didn't see anything about Spacely Sprockets. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Good bill, vote yes.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1178? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1178. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1178 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1119.
House Bill 1119 by Representative McLaughlin, all Senators Hodge and Roberts, concerning income tax credit for the donation of food to a hunger relief charitable organization.
Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I move the Appropriations Committee report. And the bill.
Thank you, sir.
1119.
Thank you, sir. To the Appropriations Committee report.
There were no amendments offered at the Appropriations Committee.
Okay, is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor say aye. Representative McLaughlin, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed, no. The Appropriation Committee report passes. Representative McLaughlin, do we have any other committee reports?
Finance Committee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we move the Finance Committee report.
To the Finance Committee report, Representative McLaughlin.
Again, it came out of the Finance Committee with approval and no amendments.
Is there any further discussion on the Finance Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Finance Committee report. Those in favor say aye. Yes. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The Finance Committee report passes. Do we have any further committee reports, Representative McLaughlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We move the Agriculture Committee report.
Thank you, sir. To the Agricultural Committee report? To the Agricultural Committee report?
Yes, it came out of Ag Committee with no amendments.
Is there any further discussion on the Agricultural Committee report?
Got an amendment.
Got an amendment on the Ag Committee report.
There was an amendment to the Ag Committee report.
There was an amendment to the Ag Committee report. Okay. Is there any further discussion to the Ag Committee report as amended? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Ag Committee report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The Agricultural Committee report passes. Is there any further committee report?
No.
Then to the bill, sir.
Yes, we move House Bill 1119.
Thank you, sir. It's been moved. Is there any further? Yes, Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is a good bill. This allows our farmers and ranchers, which in many cases are already giving their excess crops over to charities, to get a deduction and further a tax credit when they're doing that, and help out our homeless and help out those around not only the nation but in many cases the world, in feeding them and doing what they do for our communities already through their hard work. I ask for a yes vote.
Is there any further? Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for the bill. I just want to make a public apology for confusing one successful Republican in northwestern Colorado for another one. So I really appreciate it. Well, in appropriations this morning when I used the wrong family name, I just really appreciate that. Thank you. Good bill.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1119? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1119. All those in, yes, Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a different bill, so ignore that apology. I don't mean it. I take that apology back. Whatever I said in appropriations stands. Shame on both of you.
You're killing me, Smalls. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apology ignored.
Is there any further real discussion on House Bill 1119? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1119. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1119 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1211.
House Bill 1211, Representative Young, all Senator Talk Chop concerning ensuring access to quality complex rehabilitation technology in the Medicaid program.
This is a different bill.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1211 and the committee report from Appropriations and the committee report from Public Health Care and Human Services.
Thank you, sir. To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Appropriations Committee simply added the appropriations clause needed to fund this bill. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Representative Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm trying to understand what the Appropriations Committee report did. You said it. Are you
doing the right bill? This is 1211.
1211. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have no idea what you just said, but thank you, sir. Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, appropriations, we had a good discussion on this legislation and its promotion and really helping those who need these type of assistance in not only their recovery, but their ability to live a life that has some level of quality. So I appreciate it. I know this isn't to the bill, but that was my part in this bill going forward, the appropriation side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Stevens. Oh, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Appropriations Committee report passes. Representative Young, please, to the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report really represents the bill. We had a strike below the original bill as first introduced. Unfortunately, had a rather large fiscal note on it, and I really thank all of the different stakeholders and also the department for spending a huge amount of time to go back through the entire bill, come up with a better solution. Clearly, the fiscal note is doable in this budget, and it still meets the needs of those that need these complex rehab technologies the most. And so I urge an aye vote on the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the... Yes, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this bill. We heard this in committee, and really this is a necessity, I think, that we discussed in committee. Rep. Young, my only question was, we had asked the department also, though, to really start taking a look, right, at the parts issue. How long was it taking? Are we still going to follow through with that, is what I want to know.
Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Stevens. I do believe that the department is going to look at that. If they aren't already, I will really bird dog this and make sure that they are, because if they are not able to have the parts, if we can't get repairs done in a timely way, these folks are really out of business. I mean, they can't move anywhere, whether it be in the community or in their homes. So I appreciate your diligence in making sure that this happens. We'll work together to make sure it does.
Representative Stevens.
Yes, thank you. For those who might be watching, what this issue is about is when you have a very, very specialized wheelchair and you have a part that breaks or that something happens to that wheelchair, it's taken as much as 6 months to even get it apart, which is ridiculous. And so we really want to make sure that we're moving faster, we're moving more efficiently, and that people who have very, very specific wheelchairs are able to get these parts and actually have this taken care of in a very timely manner. It means their freedom. So thanks, Rep. Young. I appreciate that. I want to make sure that we really are on top of that.
Representative Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to completely 100% agree with my colleague, Representative Stevens, on this. I think this is a really good and important bill, and I'd be happy to join the bird dog pack to make sure that we don't leave people bedridden for months while they wait for parts or wait for approvals in various parts of the system, whether it's insurance companies or whoever else that slow down the process. Good bill. Vote yes. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion on the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report, the question before us is the adoption of the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The Public Health Care and Human Services Committee report passes. Representative Young, to the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you heard two of our colleagues come up and endorse the strike blow. The strike blow is, in fact, the bill now. We had compelling testimony in Public Health Care and Human Services about the difference that these complex rehab technologies make to people's lives. One woman came and said that because of her custom wheelchair that she is now able to work. She has completed a college degree and is engaged to be married. And those things were not possible before she had access to these kinds of technologies. The problem we have, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that you can't just approve a partial custom wheelchair. All the pieces need to work together. And so this bill allows that to happen. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1211? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1211. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 1211 passes. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1159.
House Bill 1159, Representatives Young and Dorr, all Senators Schwartz and Crowder, concerning state sales new tax exemption for components used in biogas production systems.
Representative Young.
Apparently it's my day for the well, Mr. Chair. I move the House Bill 1159, the committee report on appropriations, committee report on finance, and the committee report on agriculture, livestock, and natural resources.
To the Appropriations Committee report, Representative Young.
Do you want to speak? You start off. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was an amendment that was moved in appropriations this morning. Essentially is an effort to try to limit the hot air, the biogas. Actually, we have a big project going up in Weld County, and the concern was that perhaps that project might outstrip our financial resources. So the amendment essentially limits the tax refund now under this amendment to $75,000 per project with a total amount of $300,000 per year. Representative Dorr, do you wish to add?
Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while the amendment takes away some of the activity that we maybe had hoped the first year, the idea behind it is that it will allow the promotion of these type of programs to continue to be brought into Colorado. And our hope is that the incentive would do that, and as the bill moves forward, a greater discussion around that incentive will occur.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was a no on this amendment in appropriations, and I was a no on this amendment in appropriations because I just feel like this is such a great bill. It's such a great idea. The fact that we not only are capping the amount, but we're also, there's a 5-year sunset review on this. Concerns me because this is sending, in my mind, a bad message to the industry, and it's sending a bad message to the people of Colorado. Is this the one that does the 5-year cap? Yeah. Anyway, so and this is also the bill that I needed to apologize to the Monforts and the Leprinos for confusing names. I really do apologize. You successful guys, I really do apologize. But you know, I think it's a great bill. I think the amendment is actually I didn't like the amendment. So if you all, well, the only problem is I think you have appropriations in this committee report too. So I don't know how to tell you. Were there appropriations?
Yes, ma'am. That's what we're at. We're at the appropriations
Yeah, no,
committee.
I understand that, Mr. Chair. I was just trying to remember whether the appropriations were actually put on the committee report. As there's no appropriation. So that being said, members, I would vote no and let's try to reduce the hot air on this bill, particularly on this committee report. I think this actual Appropriations Committee report stinks.
Yes, Mr. Minority Leader, any non-snarky comments?
Members, I would also urge a no vote on this committee report as well. No, and not because it stinks or because it's, you know, we're up to it and we need to put our boots on. None of that stuff. But the reality is there was an amendment that was put on in the Finance Committee that already put a sunset on this bill. Now, I know there was a lot of concern that we heard in appropriations this morning that, well, what happens if 2 or 3 years down the road this starts growing, a bunch more of these people come in and start trying to take advantage of this, and then we don't have the money for it. I get those concerns. I have those same concerns. But that's why there's a sunset placed on this bill in case that actually happens. So there's no reason that we need to put a sunset on there and then also change the cap on the what you can claim as $75,000. And if you read the fiscal note, these things cost millions of dollars to build. And then now we're going to cap this tax credit at $75,000. It's really not much of an incentive. Might as well just not do anything, because the reality is to offer somebody, well, $75,000, yes, that is a lot of money, but to offset the cost of a multi-million-dollar project, that's really not that much. And so the reality is if we're actually going to have this credit and actually have it be meaningful and actually be effective, it makes no sense to cap it at $75,000. I don't even know what the rationale was behind $75,000, and maybe the sponsors can explain to me where they came up with $75,000. Was that something that was brought to them by the industry that said, hey, $75,000 is the break point, or what? But the reality is I do support the underlying bill. I did vote for it in committee, but I have a problem with this committee report and us basically putting two sets of guardrails on here. We already have the sunset, so there's no reason that we need this. So I urge a no vote on the Appropriations Committee report.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think that the bill's or the amendment sponsor would like to defend his amendment. I'll let him do that, and then I'll make my comments afterwards.
Yes, Representative, Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we're going to go ahead and lay over House Bill 1159, and the committee will rise and report.
Thank you, sir. Are there any objections to laying over House Bill 1159? Seeing none, House Bill 1159 will be laid over as requested by the Assistant Majority Leader. Yeah, the committee will rise and report.
The House will come back to order. Mr. Caller, please read the report of committee of the whole.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of the Whole begs leave reports under consideration following attached bills being second reading of and makes the following recommendations thereon. House Bills 1119 amended, 1127 amended, 1178 amended, 1204 amended, 1211 amended, 1327 amended, 1328 amended, 1329 amended, 1330, 1331 amended, 1338 amended, passed on second reading and ordered gross place silent counter for third and final passage.
Representative Salazar. You've heard the motion. There are no amendments at the desk. Mr. Caller, please open the machine and members proceed to vote.
Wait for me. Don't push it.
Representative Del Grosso, Exum, Lee, McLaughlin, Hamner, and Zabel. Close the machine with 64 aye votes, 0 no votes, 1 excuse, and 0 absent. The report of the committee of the whole is adopted. Announcements and introductions. Representative Primavera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For members of Public Health and Human Services Committee, listen up. We get to go home earlier today because we were laying over House Bill 1357 and House Bill 1358 until next Tuesday. And I have one more announcement, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
I just want to remind people you got this on your desk last week. On April 9th, which is tomorrow, the mammogram van from St. Joseph's Hospital will be here from 8 to 3:30 on the corner of Colfax and Grant. All of your aides could participate if they are due for a mammogram or need a mammogram. Staff from the Capitol can participate. They take all insurance except Kaiser Permanente, and they also help people who are uninsured. So there's a phone number on the bottom here. If you know anybody that needs a mammogram, they're there to do that tomorrow, and it's a great facility. Thank you.
Representative Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dems, don't forget today is our aide and intern appreciation lunch, so please let's get over there to show them how much we appreciate the work they do for us. Thank you.
Representative Ryden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's time for another senior moment, but knowing how hungry you are, we'll make this a senior 30 seconds, okay? On your desk is a flyer. It's really important that you know that these resources exist to help our elderly and disabled folks get services. A lot of times for an older person to stay in their home, it might be just a matter of somebody being able to help them with their groceries or take them to a doctor's appointment. And this resource will help you do that. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Representative McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Health Insurance and Environment Committee, we do not have a meeting this morning, so you can go to lunch.
Representative Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, don't forget tomorrow is the Behavioral Health Caucus lunch from 12 to 1 in SCR room 356. Thank you.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House Agriculture, Livestock, and Natural Resources Committee and anyone else who wants to participate, we took a couple of weeks off for the long bill from our joint House and Senate Ag Committee meetings, but we will be meeting tomorrow at 7:30 in Committee Room 107 to hear a presentation about the invasion of the emerald ash borer and the potential for devastation of our urban forests by this exotic pest. And then we're also going to hear a presentation by the local environmental health officials on the work that they do for to keep our communities safe. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Business, Labor, Economic Workforce Development Committee, we will meet at 1:30 today. We will hear House Bill 1344. 1346 has been laid over. See you at 1:30.
Representative Durant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joint Budget Committee will meet at 2 p.m.
Representative Hamner. And the Capitol Choir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We didn't get to sing first thing this morning, but we get to send everyone off with a very happy birthday to our own Representative Court, celebrating her, I don't know which one. A big one. Wow. Okay, we don't talk about that. But if I could get the Capitol Choir here to sing a very special happy birthday to Representative Court today. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Representative Court. Happy birthday to you.
Medicare, Medicare.
Oh, it's that big.
She's still alive at 65.
Any further announcements or introductions? Seeing none, the House will be in recess till 1 p.m. today.